So I thank everyone for joining us for the last Global Change seminar of the semester. This seminar series is hosted by the USGS Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, and it's organized by the Global Change Fellows, which is a interdisciplinary fellowship program through CASC at NC State University, and with affiliate universities across the Southeastern region. We're gonna have a new seminar series next semester and next year, so check the CASC website at ccasc.ncsu.edu, and there's also some other upcoming seminars on climate adaptation and climate science. So just some housekeeping. We're going to record today's talk and post it online. And to keep everything organized, we're going to keep everyone muted during the talk. If you have a question, just post it in the chat. I think there's some instructions in there. And then we'll relay the questions to Dr. Smith afterward in the Q&A section. And if you're calling in, you should be able to use *9 to raise your hand and ask questions at the end. So yeah, thanks to everyone for coming and being flexible with the new format. Looks like we have a great turnout. So yeah, maybe a silver lining to doing this online. So yeah, with that, I'm excited to introduce our speaker for today's seminar, Dr. Gavin Smith. He's a professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at NC State University. His research focuses on hazard mitigation, disaster recovery, and climate change adaptation, and in the integration of research and practice through deep community engagement. He's currently working on developing a graduate certificate in disaster resilient policy, engineering, and design, and helping to coordinate a university-wide effort focused on disaster resilience. In line with that, he's the author of Planning for Post-Disaster Recovery, a review of the United States Disaster Assistance Framework, and he's the co-editor of the text Adapting to Climate Change, Lessons from Natural Hazards Planning, which we'll hear more about today. His current research includes assessing the state of disaster resilient design education at US universities, developing a national survey of the role of states and building capacity of local governments, and a comparative assessment of hazard-prone housing acquisition programs in the US, New Zealand, and Australia. He's also served as policy advisor to a number of governments addressing planning for post-disaster recovery, flood hazard risk reduction, and climate change adaptation, including advising 4 governors, including Governor Hunt following Hurricanes Fran and Floyd, and Governor Barber after Hurricane Katrina. More recently, Dr. Smith led a team of 8 faculty, 18 graduate students, and 2 practitioners to assist 6 hard-hit low-capacity communities following Hurricane Matthew. And today we'll get to hear more about several of these topics. So I'm excited to hand over the virtual podium to Dr. Gavin Smith.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay at this point?
I can, yep.
Okay, good. And in fact, I don't see it on my screen, but I am not actually being shown, correct? Which I'd prefer not to, because I tend to move around a bit.
On my end, I don't see you.
Okay, yep, fair enough. Okay, well, thanks for having me. And this is something that I've been working on for some time, and I'm going to talk actually a fair amount about the intersection between natural hazards, disasters, and climate change adaptation, including in particular, all of the things that we have been doing for decades in emergency management or hazards management and the lessons that can be applied to climate change adaptation. I'm going to start off with a discussion of adaptation challenges and opportunities. I'm going to quickly go through a case study focused on my time working in Mississippi, which is part of a larger text that my colleague and I, Bruce Glavovic, led. I'm going to talk about some of my more recent research, which is in New Zealand, looking at hazard-prone acquisition programs, and was there in December, and I'll talk a bit about that. And then I'll bring us back to the imperatives that we identified in our book, which actually is a distillation of 264 recommendations in the book, which I'll summarize in just a moment. And then I'll close with maybe a little pitch on the Disaster Resilient Policy Engineering and Design Certificate for those students online at NC State, UNC, or Duke that might be interested in pursuing that. What I wanted to focus on or start with is really describing kind of the organizing principles of this textbook that was shown on the first slide. And one of the things that I've realized for decades actually is there's really a poor coordination between climate change adaptation and what we would call natural hazards risk management. You know, the emergency managers and many others that are involved in risk reduction and disaster recovery and response, they've been doing a lot of work that's directly germane to adaptation, but until recently, there was still this disconnect between climate change, adaptation scholars and practitioners, and those involved in hazard mitigation or risk reduction and disaster recovery. And I'm also going to talk a bit about the challenges. And one of the big problems we face in the US, and I think part of it is actually our own hubris, is that we tend to limit our lesson drawing to US examples. And I think that's really short-sighted. And so that was another reason for the book, is to try to draw lessons globally. If you look at the images to the right of the slide, they are basically very similar. One at the top is the process by which you do hazard mitigation or risk reduction planning. On the bottom is, in essence, the IPCC report that looks at climate change adaptation planning. And they're very similar in many ways, but we are still acting as if they're working in isolation. And I'm going to talk about how we can better connect the two.
Gavin, just sorry, I think we're sharing my screen instead of yours. If you don't mind, switching over to your share screen to follow the slides.
Okay, so I'm sorry. So which how should I do that? Which so just should I click on your?
If you click on share screen at the bottom, and then pull up your PowerPoint screen.
Yeah, don't, let's see. So is this, are you seeing the first slide now? The second slide?
Nope, not yet.
No,
You were sharing previously. If needed, Sam can roll it and
yeah, so I just didn't know where the slide transitions were. I was trying to keep up, but.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was running it off of my slide deck. Is that what I should be doing?
Yeah, as long as you're sharing that screen. It doesn't look like the share is working.
So are you not seeing the first slide?
No.
Okay. Well, so Sam, are you? Do you have control there? Are you? Let's see. Do you see the Adapting to Climate Change Lessons from Natural Hazards Planning chapter?
Yeah, I can pull it up.
Well, that would be I think that's the fourth slide. Maybe if I could just have you advance them, if that's okay. I'm not sure if that's the easiest way to.
Yep, it's the slide 4. Yeah, let me share that, and just let me know if I get off with the slides.
I'm going to end the show, at least on my side. I need to. Okay, so I'm going to. Let's see. Okay, all right. Now I think we're good. Okay, so I'm going to. Can you go back one slide, please? Oh, okay, if you could go back one more. Okay, so the organizing principles of the book, that's the slide we're on now, correct?
Great, yep.
Okay, all right, if you could go ahead and advance to the next one. I just want to make sure we're on the same page, literally. Okay. All right, so what I wanted to do is quickly run through the chapters for those of you that may be interested, just kind of give you a taste of some of the breadth of the text. It does include kind of introductory materials associated with how we link disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. There's several chapters on the role of planning. And then we shift into cases across the globe that look at things like flood risk governance in the UK by Ian White, or how South Africa is grappling with climate change adaptation, lesson drawing from the Indian Ocean tsunami, and even learning from those policy frames that are tied to fire management or bushfire management in Australia. Next slide, please. And these are just, again, some additional cases looking at risk reduction in Peru, looking at work in California and many other places. But what I'd like to do is draw your attention to 2 that are underlined. And there are 2 chapters that I had written in addition to the introduction and the conclusion to the text. There is one on hurricane lesson drawing, if those of you are interested in that, drawing from Hurricanes Fran and Floyd in the 90s. I'm going to focus in on the work that I did in coastal Mississippi and really looking at lesson drawing following Hurricanes Camille and Katrina. Next slide, please. So some of the things that I think are important for us to kind of ground ourselves in, and maybe some misconceptions, actually, in my opinion, is there's a lot of discussion in the U.S., and it's changing, but there's the discussions of limitations of resources to take on climate change adaptation. I would argue that that's perhaps misguided in the sense that we have billions of dollars that we're spending largely in the post-disaster arena. One of the challenges is we're spending that money in a way that doesn't always address climate change adaptation. And I'll give a powerful example of that in coastal Mississippi after Katrina. And not only in Mississippi, but also in Louisiana. For example, if you think about the rebuilding of the levee in New Orleans, we rebuilt it, paying through it through taxpayer dollars. We rebuilt it back largely to the 100-year flood. It cost over $14 billion. And you could actually make the argument that it's already out of date. We didn't incorporate climate change adaptation. We didn't design for uncertainty, which is a theme I'll return to in just a moment. Next slide, please. One of the other things I wanted to talk about, a big theme to me that is really fundamental to what we're facing, and one of our fundamental challenges is, in a nutshell, how are we going to address the idea that human settlements are largely built to, in a way, and designed in a way to reflect the climate of the past? And to me, one of the most powerful examples of that, and what we could be expecting more in the future, are significant heat waves. And if you look at the case study in Chicago, the 1995 heat wave, over 730 people died, largely preventable deaths. In many cases because they were multi-story walk-up apartments. Many of the people that died were poor. They didn't feel that they had the option of running their air conditioner, or they didn't have air conditioning. And many people were afraid to walk the 2 to 3 blocks to a cooling station, or they weren't able to do it. And as a result, over 700 people died, largely in their homes. Through superheated air. If you look at 2003 in France, even worse, and this is a major disaster that many people don't even talk about. More than 14,000 people died in France. Again, largely preventable deaths. It was in the summer. Younger population left for vacation. The elderly remained, and they died in their homes. Across Europe, more than 70,000 people died. These are largely preventable deaths, and they're fundamentally tied to the fact that we have urban areas in northern climates that often don't have air conditioning, or are designed in a way, like the image in the bottom right, which is what's called a Haussmann-style architecture in France, that was designed a long time ago and they did have design elements that dealt with high ceilings and what have you. But if you look at the graphic, those at the top, the servants tend to live there. Now those are rented out. Those are flats that are rented out, and they often don't have air conditioning. And these are largely preventable, but we're going to have to retrofit entire cities. We're going to have to retrofit the globe in terms of human and urban settlements. The image on the left, that's just a spatial distribution of those that died in the 95 heat wave. You see the large number of African Americans that died. Again, many of them were elderly, single, afraid to leave their homes, didn't have air conditioning. And so, thinking about this and even going to today's fundamental challenge, which is the current pandemic, we're finding in Chicago, again, a disproportionate impact on African Americans, whether it's pre-existing conditions of diabetes or just the lack of health care, the large number of people that are dying, again, due to pre-existing conditions. Next slide, please. So some additional opportunities to think about, and this returns us back to the existing policies that we have in place. We have what's called the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 that requires states and local governments to develop hazard mitigation plans. I'm going to talk about those in just a moment. And we also have, what's interesting is because we have a lack of a national adaptation policy, states and local governments are figuring this out on their own. They're doing it on an ad hoc basis. They're adapting. And, the Miamis and the Charlestons and the New York cities and cities throughout California are working towards this end. To me, one of the big questions too is, well, that's impressive and it's exciting that they're doing it in many cases without federal support. But what about the small and mid-sized communities with modest capacity? How are we going to advance rural resilience? I talked about urban challenges, but also how are we going to advance the issues associated with rural resilience that don't have those resources and assets perhaps to draw from? Another issue to recognize is that the Disaster Recovery Reform Act was recently passed, which is going to be updating and actually modifying the Disaster Mitigation Act. And there is going to be pre-disaster funding, which is substantial and important based on a prior year's damages. And so that could be really significant. Again, in 2017, we would have had hundreds of billions of dollars in pre-disaster mitigation or hazard mitigation. And by that, I mean risk reduction funding to retrofit buildings, to move people out of the floodplain and so forth. However, again, it's based on the prior year's cost. And if you have a year where there's not major disasters, those funds are going to be dramatically less. And so this is going to be a problem. The ebb and flow of resources is going to be a real problem. Another issue that's problematic with the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, and its name now is Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, affectionately referred to as BRIC. It really is emphasizing infrastructure. And so if that's the case, and if we shift away from trying to address housing related issues, that could have its own set of problems and challenges. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. Again, continuing with the theme that there are a lot of national policies in play that we should be doing a better job of using, not only for their intended purpose, but also tweaking them, modifying them to help us better address climate change adaptation. So what I'm going to talk about is a 6-year study that myself and Phil Berke and Ward Lyles, a PhD student of ours, worked on. We focused on 30 coastal states and 175 local governments where we did actual surveys, we did interviews, we collected a range of data, of which all of that is located at mitigationguide.org. So it has everything from best practices we identified in local hazard mitigation plans. We have the tool that we use to assess the quality of those plans, as well as journal articles, reports, and so forth. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to take a look at that site. Next slide, please. So the findings in a nutshell of a 6-year study, we were very fortunate to have 6 years of funding from the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Science and Technology, their university programs division. And what we found in a nutshell is, again, remember I said that all states and local governments are required to develop hazard mitigation plans in order to receive pre and post-disaster hazard mitigation funding. And those plans in a nutshell assess risk. They are supposed to develop policies and projects to reduce that risk or mitigate it. And then they're supposed to develop a strategy to monitor and implement those plans over time. Those plans are comprised of a number of components, whether they're goals or policies or projects or an implementation strategy. And none of the plans we evaluated scored high across all those elements. And for those of you in planning or those of you that aren't, a plan in some ways is as strong as its weakest link because all of these elements are integrated. A vision, a set of goals, a set of policies and projects that are predicated on an understanding of risk in your community and a strategy to implement them over time. If all of those components aren't effectively connected, the plan in and of itself is not nearly as effective. But one of the other things we found that was particularly troubling was the risk assessment, assessing risk in your community, which was often the strongest part in the plan, and they were often done by consultants. There was not a rational nexus between those findings of risk and assessment of risk and the possible risk reduction measures that those plans contained. There's a fundamental breakdown of what we would call the fact base and a set of policies or projects. Also, very few of the plans looked at land use, so very few of them were proactive. They were often reactive. Those that did have projects in them were looking at, we're going to buy out the 10 homes that flood all the time in the past, as opposed to doing that plus thinking about how they would use land use strategies to limit future development in areas that were prone to flooding now or hazard now or might be in the future. So the role of land use planning plays a really fundamental role in adaptation, but these plans are not doing that effectively. And then finally, almost none of the plans that we looked at, and I should be clear, this study finished in 2016, I believe. None of the plans, almost none of them, looked at the nexus between hazard risk reduction and climate change adaptation. At the state level, which are also required, the plans were varied. In many cases, the state their role is to help build the local capacity to do good hazard mitigation or risk reduction work. but the capacity in states across the nation are varied, and they actually are very tied to, their capacity is very tied to post-disaster aid. So they staff up after a big disaster, they lose a lot of their staff in hazard mitigation, and then they staff up. So there's not a large, there's not a sufficient base level of capacity at most states to help build local capacity. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do now is shift into a few of the case studies, and this one is the case study of Hurricane Katrina in Mississippi. And many of you may or may not know this. Many people think of Katrina as a Louisiana event, and there's no doubt it was devastating to Louisiana. Over 300,000 homes were destroyed in Louisiana. What many people don't realize is approximately 50,000 homes were destroyed in coastal Mississippi. And in fact, if you look at the orientation of the storm, the upper right-hand quadrant is the strongest in terms of storm surge. Given its size, given its forward speed, and given the fact that it's pushing water into kind of the tip of the boot of Louisiana and up onto land in coastal Mississippi, even though it was a Category 3 storm when it made landfall, the storm surge was more approximate to a Category 5 storm, in the sense that we had at its highest point 26-foot storm surge in coastal Mississippi. Next slide, please. And one of the challenges we face is, how are we going to plan for post-disaster recovery? This is an aerial image, an overlay of the storm surge inundation levels with planimetric data. It also shows the yellow and red and orange lines. Don't worry about that too much. I know that the font is quite small, but it shows, in a nutshell, what this map is showing is not only the inundation level, which stopped in essence at an elevated rail bed, if you can see at the northern part of the blue imagery. What it also depicts, and in terms of actual mapping, when you look at the maps on the ground, what we found is that the flood insurance rate maps were dramatically inaccurate. They were using old data and old technologies. And as a result, the requirements to comply with new flood ordinance standards were 3 to 8 feet higher than they were before the storm. And what that led to is, in some cases, homes being required to be elevated 20 to 25, even more, in some cases almost 30 feet high in the air on pilings in order to comply with these new standards. And so we did, and this is one of the roles that I took on when I was working in Mississippi for 2 years, is we convinced the local governments to adopt these higher standards, although some communities chose to try to allow redevelopment to occur before the standards were put in place, because they were actually going to be quite onerous. Next slide, please. One of the things that we found is there was devastation on the coast. As I alluded to, 50,000 homes simply gone. The image on the left is a 3-story condo. The image on the right is a photograph, and I took both of these. The image on the right is a mile inland, and that was once a residential neighborhood. So it tells you several things. One is the height of the storm surge, but also the low-lying topography. If you notice the image on the left, they're quickly trying to say, look, it's zoned R3, that's residential, it's for sale. You could rebuild before they adopt these more stringent standards, thereby perpetuating risk, which is a really problematic thing, and we were trying our best to limit that. Ultimately, all the coastal counties did adopt those higher standards. But what also happened is a lot of people started to think about moving inland, and they were doing it, however, on an ad hoc basis. And this is one of the things I would predict in the future. When we have these catastrophic storms, there is an ad hoc migration northward. And what they were doing is developing entirely new neighborhoods, in many cases ill-planned, ill-conceived, didn't take into account the needs of the people that were trying to migrate themselves. To me, in a microcosm, this is another big issue that we're going to be facing, not only in the US, but around the world, as many people aren't going to be able to afford to rebuild in some of these areas, in part because of the cost of construction. Next slide, please. And so one of the big issues to me, another big issue is to think about, associated with land use and building codes, is what is the right standard? What's the appropriate design standard in an era of climate change? The image on the left is just an aerial image showing the destruction on the coast, but it also shows a house in red, also shown in the bottom, that survived. Well, it's 18-inch thick steel reinforced concrete. It survived, the shell of it survived, and is that the future of coastal construction? And if so, that means that only the super rich are going to be living on the coast. And so those that are working and providing important, whether it's the recreational industry, tourist industry, and others, there may be very few chances for people to actually construct affordable housing in the coastal zone. The image on the upper right is actually all that remains of a bank. That's the bank vault. And again, to me, that's a powerful example of a kind of a almost tongue-in-cheek. That's a design standard that endured, it survived. You can even see the yellow bollards on the right. That's the drive-through. And, you know, is that the future? Are we going to be building structures like that to survive? Yet at the same time, the image in the lower center, it's a happy family. I think they're eating ice cream sitting on a little dory. It obscures the fact that they're building a 3-story condominium in an area that was simply leveled by the storm, and they're advertising it as such. On the bottom right is the image, kind of iconic image of SS Hurricane Camille, 1969. That tugboat was washed ashore, and somewhat ironically, it stayed in place after Hurricane Katrina. Next slide, please. So this is the manifestation, if you will, of these new design standards in the coastal zone in Mississippi. And what's even more sobering in some ways, you could say what you will about the aesthetics or even the structural integrity of the image on the upper left, given that those are, those are cinder blocks. And so the structural integrity of that building, you know, I'm not a structural engineer, but nevertheless, I don't think I would want to be purchasing that unit. The stairs alone probably cost about $120,000. The foundation is more. But the sobering issue is these houses and these structures are built to comply with the 100-year flood, which talks about extreme vulnerability. But what it also says, and this is an issue we talked about post-disaster, is that in many ways, if we have another Katrina, these homes conceivably could be destroyed again because Katrina exceeded the 100-year design standard. And this brings me back to the point, what is the right design standard in an era of climate change? If we're going to be having more intense storms, is designing to the 100-year flood appropriate? If this is what the 100-year flood compliance looks like and the extreme vulnerability, should we be living there? Who pays for it? Another sobering reminder of it is the image on the right. That is one of the 50,000 vacant lots that existed after the storm. This was an image, in fact, I took all these images at the 10-year anniversary. I toured the area with Governor Barber after the storm, 10 years after the storm. And it made me think back to a week or so after the storm when we were talking about the concept of an iconic linear park. There are thousands of live oaks that run that 80-mile stretch of coastline. It was simply devastating. We were talking about it. And they said, absolutely not. We don't want to do that. And then we had the realization of the cost of construction. We had the BP oil spill. We had the economic downturn. And as a result, going back 10 years later, of the 50,000 houses that were destroyed, there were about 25 or 30,000 vacant lots 10 years after the storm because people couldn't afford to rebuild. Now, some would say this is almost a natural evolution, that people are kind of abandoning that property. They still own it. They're trying to figure out what to do with it. And my point is, it's not planned. It's very much ad hoc. And as a result, you know, the solutions, if you will, in many cases are somewhat ill-planned and ad hoc, more organic. And that's another issue from a policy standpoint. How are we going to be thinking through these issues of adaptation? How are we going to strategically inject adaptation into post-disaster recovery? Because what I will say is there was a $15 billion spent on an 80-mile stretch of coast about a mile deep. $15 billion to rebuild the communities back to the 100-year flood. So again, massive amounts of money, but was it misguided perhaps in terms of how we spent it? Next slide, please. So I'm going to shift to another case. This is moving into the work that I've been doing in New Zealand. This is Metata, New Zealand, that was devastated by a mudslide, a much smaller scale, but still quite devastating. In Metata, there were 87 homes damages, 27 were destroyed in a 2005 mud flow. Next slide, please. And one of the issues that is not only facing Metata, which I'll explain in a moment, but also communities around the world, is kind of the idea of what I would call hazardscapes, but also conveying and even owning risk. And I say that somewhat kind of tongue-in-cheek with these quotes around it, is that on the left is an image I took from the New Zealand museum, which at the bottom, if you can see in the yellow text, I rather like the idea of owning a volcano. And this goes to the issue of in Merata, and you may have heard of the Whakatane volcanic eruption. This was a volcano that was privately owned. This is actually some older images drawn from years ago where people had died. Well, I was actually there during the eruption. The image on the right is a photograph I took during the eruption, which was 20 miles from where I sat. But nevertheless, we had no idea of knowing that one, all of the people that were on the island were tourists, and they were all staying in the same hotel that we were in. And we were having breakfast at the hotel when they were bringing in survivors and or those that perished in our own hotel, the one that we were in. And my point is that this is a privately owned volcano that a lot of scientists had left because of the vulnerability, but the private sector was still bringing people out there. Now, this is an extreme example, but the idea of kind of ownership of risk is germane not only to the Merata example, the Mississippi example, and many others, but just something I want for us to kind of think about when I talk about the next slides. Next slide, please. So in Merata, this is actually a graphic that my colleague, Wendy Saunders, who I'm working with in New Zealand, provided. We're working on a journal article and a report in a book chapter at the same time. This is a graphic that shows the mudslide. And so it's coming from left to right because you can't tell in the elevation change, but it's a very high, a very steep pitch to the left. And it's actually a catchment or a watershed that's flowing into the town. So on one end, is the Pacific Ocean. On the other end is a very steep sloped area. The mud flow happened very quickly, inundated the town, and they're actually in the midst of thinking through a buyout of many of these homes. And what's interesting to me in some cases is the idea that they tried for years to develop an engineering approach, basically large wire netting that would capture the future boulders that would flow downhill that they're expecting in the future. This was triggered by a major flood in 2005. And what's interesting is in the report that Wendy and I are working on, and she is the one that's writing up this as we speak, is that one of the really fascinating things that they're talking about in New Zealand, they're directly confronting the linkage between natural hazards and adaptation. They're saying these types of events that would trigger this type of mud flow is going to be happening more frequently in these areas. So instead of this being, which was they deemed a 200 to a 500-year event, they think this may shift to more like a 100-year or even a 50-year event with greater certainty because of all sorts of characteristics, whether it's denuded hillsides, steep sloped areas, lack of vegetation, and so forth. Next slide, please. So this is an image of part of Merata, and the reason I show this is another way to convey risk. So this person, you at first face, you say, oh, it's a nice rock garden. Well, the reason they have a rock garden there is because that was from the last mud flow. And they just basically put a fence around it and put some tropical plants around it, and it actually looks quite nice. But it's an indicator. It shows us, it tells us, as it does oftentimes when you have these mud flows, you have this evidence that's there that shows the risk that is facing. It's in full view if you look for it. Next slide, please. This is actually an image as we were driving through the community. It's actually quite controversial, so we didn't stop and talk to anyone. We did interview local officials, but this is one of the homes that has agreed to take the buyout. And in this case, it's not the acquisition and demolition of a home, but rather it's its relocation to another location. You can see on the right the steep hillside, and then off to the left would be the Pacific Ocean. Next slide, please. Like in the US, like in all places that deal with the potential buyouts of hazard-prone houses in the US, and I should have said this explicitly, what often happens is following a federally declared disaster, we provide funding to acquire and typically demolish homes, and then people are given money to build or buy a house, in theory, outside of the hazard area. Here, they're also providing funding to pursue the buyout, and it is voluntary. But this is just a sentiment that you see is oftentimes that people that are dealing with a buyout, and I want to be clear that buyouts are about as personal as you can get. Imagine if you're in their situation, government officials coming to talk to you about the acquisition and demolition of your home. Some people were willing to go, some people were reluctant, and eventually are starting to think about doing this over time, and others are steadfast and saying, we're not leaving. Another variable that is of great importance here is that this is a former Maori battlefield. And so the Maori have a deep place attachment to land, as do many of us that are deeply tied to the land. But nevertheless, there's all sorts of layers of complexity associated with this. And so the reason I bring this up is in an era of climate change, as we think about buyouts as a resettlement strategy, we could talk about it from an academic standpoint, but we also need to talk about it in the context of how we're interacting with people and people's lives and their livelihood and their attachment to place. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about the other case, or one of the other cases we're looking at is Christchurch, New Zealand. And so we were in Metata, then we went to Christchurch, which on the scale is much larger. Over 13,000 homes have been acquired and demolished in what are called red zones. This is actually a map taken from one of my students' presentations last year in a class, Billy Balton, who was presenting on the Christchurch case. But what we found is in Christchurch, what's really interesting about the Christchurch case is that in New Zealand, they don't have a national program like we do in the US to do large-scale buyouts and resettlement. Rather, they're created in the aftermath of disaster. And they kind of think through the strategies. In this case, it bordered on almost a forcible relocation of those people in the red zones. They deemed these areas red zones. They cut off utilities. They were not going to put utilities back in play here. They provided options for insurance-based buyouts or other buyouts. And as a result, 13,000 homes were removed fairly quickly. Next slide, please. This is an image that I took when I was there in December. This is what the red zone looks like now. Imagine 13,000 homes, or give or take. In this case, it's about 7,000. And this was an area that's interesting. While it does flow, there is a river that flows by. The reason these were bought out is the massive liquefaction that occurred, and it made those sites extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. And so one of the things that they're working on is the idea, and I apologize if my dog is barking, is the idea that not only have they done these large-scale buyouts, but they also have started to think through a really interesting reutilization of this land, which is another big part and often unthought of by people in the adaptation community. What do we do with the land post-buyout? Next slide, please. And so what's really interesting, and this may seem like a fairly mundane photograph, but this is a photograph of a person's backyard. In fact, I talked with them briefly when we were there, and you notice the roses, you notice, I believe that's might be a pear tree and other vegetation in this area. What they're doing is they're remaining and recognizing this deep place attachment. So people did choose to buy out, but people go back to their individual parcels and lots to tend to their roses, to tend to their fruit trees. They have an annual program where people that are residents go and gather fruit, they cut the flowers, they tend the area. So they have allowed them to kind of think through how they continue to remain connected to this land. They're also developing a major program. In fact, they have a federal agency that is focused on the administration of the land post-buyout, which is really interesting. And so again, something for us all to think about. What do we do with this land? For example, if it were in the coastal zone, how might we repurpose this land perhaps back to its original state, whether it's a wetland or some type of natural protective measure. But these are just the kinds of things that we're learning from other nations that we don't have in play in the U.S. The use of open space post-buyout in the U.S. is very ad hoc and is very much a local decision. There's very limited assistance provided by states and local governments to help them with this really challenging issue. Next slide, please. Something I want to return to is for us to not lose sight of the fact that we can talk about this as bureaucrats or we can talk about this as academics, but it's highly personal. This is to me, a very sobering memorial that was created in Christchurch adjacent to the television station building that collapsed, where 150 people died, including a large number of children because they had the daycare center in the basement. And so again, this is a way to remember that what we're talking about, whether we're talking about buyouts, whether we're talking about resettlement, whether we're talking about adaptation, it is going to have profound effects on individuals. And in this case, this memorial is they asked the surviving family members to provide a chair that would represent someone that was lost. And the artist painted these chairs all in white. And it's a very, very sobering reminder of often what sometimes we lose sight of. It's not just public policy, it's also very, very personal. Next slide, please. So I want to bring us back to kind of the big picture to the concerns about the individual, back to the kind of the big picture. These are a distillation of all of the findings, as I remember, if you remember when I first began, the idea of 264 recommendations from the number of case studies that were written in the book that myself and Bruce Klovavic co-edited. We distilled all of those into 4 imperatives. And the first one I'm going to talk about briefly is the governance imperative, and thinking about how we do everything we can to facilitate good governance. In the US, one of our fundamental problems and challenges is in the post-disaster arena, we view aid as largely a governmental act. When we're hyper-reliant on federal aid post-disaster, it often leads to states unwilling to step up. It often leads to local governments not perhaps investing enough in pre-event capacity building. And so the idea is, how does the national government help support and build the capacity of state and local governments? How do we make sure that these decisions are being made inclusively? How do we address the highly contentious issues like buyouts that I referred to? And how do we deal with creating a governance structure that is inherently flexible and adaptive? Next slide, please. The other imperative that we created was what we call the capability imperative, the idea of thinking through how we do this in a forward-looking way, how we draw from community assets, both pre and post-disaster, those resources to improve risk reduction and adaptation. So how do we address those barriers that I talked about, or those opportunities and barriers at the beginning of the talk? How do we take advantage of these large funding streams and other sources to build local capacity? How do we enhance, for example, rural resilience? I think that's not getting nearly enough attention. And these are high risk, often very low capacity areas. And how do we do this? And these are some sub-bullets that talk about that. And they're discussed in depth in the text, but I wanted to kind of give you an overview of them. Next slide, please. The third imperative is a planning imperative. How do we invest more in pre-event planning? In the US in particular, we do an abysmal job of pre-event planning for risk reduction and building an enhanced adaptive capacity. Remember, when I was talking about the review of state hazard mitigation plans, very few of the plans actually were capable of investing the time and resources needed to build the capacity of local governments, even though state officials that we interviewed said, yeah, the local capacity isn't adequate. But yet they weren't investing the time and resources in the pre-event time frame to build capacity, which needs to happen before the event, and it needs to be happening on a sustained basis. How do we incentivize experimental or innovative strategies? A lot of governments are reticent to try to do that. And it does require leadership in the planning domain. And I should say, in the planning component in particular, is to think about land use planning, not only planning as a way to build collaboration, but also a means to instill good land use planning strategies. When we talk about communities, local governments perhaps not having the resources, well, it does take political will, but the idea of thinking through where capital investments will occur, thinking through making hard choices about future land use options and future investments. That's the purview of the local government, and they need support from states and federal government to help make that a reality. Next slide, please. And the last imperative is the moral imperative, one that I've touched on briefly about the recognizing that this is an individual. It directly impacts individuals, but it also impacts individuals disproportionately. Remember the Chicago experience, whether it is the heat wave or COVID-19, we see this time and time again. Socially vulnerable populations bear disproportionately the impacts of natural hazards, disasters, and climate change. And we've got to work through this. We've got to recognize and we've got to develop policies that are more ethical, that are more equitable, that are practical. These are all the types of issues that we need to be thinking about. The two images on the right, one on the bottom is Shishmaref, Alaska, which is falling into the ocean because of the loss of the protective sea ice, and coastal storms come in and they're literally falling into the ocean. The image on the top is a photo that I took in Manila, which to me is almost prototypical example of social vulnerability. You can see the high rise is obscured by the smog in the background. These are houses that are built. Those are built actually inside a concrete revetment. You can't tell that. Every year they're washed away, and every year they're built back. To me, it's just a sobering reminder of the extreme social vulnerability and the limited options that many people often have, whether they're facing natural hazards, disasters, or a changing climate. Next slide, please. So with all of that challenge and doom and gloom, perhaps, and not that this is the magic bullet, it's a very, very small piece of the puzzle, but what I wanted to close on is an effort that I've undertaken at NC State. I've actually been at NC State for 1 year. I was at UNC for 12 and had a graduate certificate program there. I'm building one here at NC State. And in a nutshell, it is comprised of 3 courses that in total are 7 hours plus 6 credit hours of electives. And the certificate is focused on disaster resilient policy, engineering, and design. And to me, what is critical for the next generation, and that's really who it's targeting, the next generation of practitioners and students, is the idea of how do we get interdisciplinary teams to work together in policy, engineering, and design. And by design, I mean landscape architecture, land use planning, architecture, building sciences, working with engineers and working with public policy experts to think through these complex issues. The courses that are required is a survey of natural hazards and disasters, which I teach in the spring, which exposes students to a lot of the cases that we've talked about today, as well as what are the factors that lead to natural hazards becoming disasters, choices we make, whether it's human settlement or social vulnerability, for example. The disaster resilient policy, engineering, and design in the speaker series class I teach in the fall, I'm teaching them this semester. And for example, for the final student project this year, student teams are looking at the partial resettlement of Boston, Charleston, and the Outer Banks, and looking at blending policy, engineering, and design thinking in a way that will resonate with local officials, recognizing things like deep place attachment and other challenges. And then finally, the track-based electives are 6 credit hours that are tied to either landscape architecture, civil engineering, or public administration, of which the College of Design, Civil Engineering, and Public Administration are also partners in that the tracks run through those 3 programs. So I will stop there and turn it back over to Sam or whomever is going to perhaps help us or walk us through some discussion.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, I wish there was a way to have a round of applause over Zoom, but let me find some questions. So I guess what we'll do is I'll just read them to you, and yeah, that way we keep everything streamlined.
Sure, and I can see them, but you go ahead. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, either way. First question from Michael Malloy. Since Katrina exceeded the 100-year flood level, is the Katrina flood now considered to be the 100-year flood level?
No. So Katrina, and maybe I should be clear. So the Katrina flood relative to the storm surge, the measurement of storm surge, this is what's interesting is that because of inadequacies in storm surge modeling, the Katrina storm surge really was closer to a 500-year flood event, particularly in coastal Mississippi. 28-foot storm surge was the highest recorded level near Pass Christian. And so, it greatly exceeds the 100-year. I guess what I was saying is that what the communities chose to do was to, based on the new flood map, they rebuilt back to the 100-year flood. And my point is that if they have another Katrina, those homes could very well be severely damaged or destroyed again because Katrina really did exceed that 100-year flood. And so to me, that's an important indicator or issue for us to think about. What should we be designing to? And something I didn't allude to, you know, the Dutch designed from the 500 to the 5,000 year return period flood event. We designed to the 100-year. And that is required. That is a minimum requirement to maintain good standing in the National Flood Insurance Program. And the unfortunate reality is a lot of local governments adhere to the minimum standard. And in an era of climate change, with our floodplains and intensity of storms changing, that's just, it's completely inadequate.
Great. Our next question from Jorge Trinidade. Since the high settlement cost, is it cost effective to let people build in an over 100-year flood area? Is land use planning a useful tool to prevent flood hazard crisis?
Well, I'll take the second part first. I'm kind of digesting the first. Is land use planning is fundamental, and this is my bias, so I should have come clean. My training is in land use planning, so maybe I'm biased, but I'm convinced that thinking about think about in a very general sense, where and how we build. You know, we can design buildings to withstand flood. We can build the 18-inch thick reinforced concrete, and it will survive. It's very expensive. Or we can think about limiting development in areas that are hazard prone. And we can also think about kind of buffers to deal with that uncertainty. For example, Charlotte, North Carolina is mapping their floodplains today as if their floodplains are already built out, and their flood elevations change 8 to 12 feet vertically. But they're regulating today as if it's already happened. So they're looking into the future, and they're regulating well into the future. So my point is that good land use planning ought to be forward-looking. By definition, land use planning is looking into the future. And so land use planning is fundamental to reducing risk. The other question, the high settlement cost, is it cost effective? I'm not sure I understand the question exactly, but is it cost effective to build in the 100-year floodplain? In an era of climate change, you know, the idea of cost effectiveness, or the idea of building in the 100-year floodplain, quote unquote, or the 1% annual chance flood event, building to that standard should be viewed as a bare minimum. In fact, the federal government suggests that. I would suggest that that's actually, in an era of climate change, we need to be thinking well beyond that. And so some communities are thinking about, you know, do you build to the 200-year return period flood, or do you limit development all the way to the 500-year floodplain? I mean, these are issues that are being discussed in communities, including Houston, near where I grew up, which is one of the communities that has had a long-standing history of really poor land use planning. They're actually talking about it. So if Houston can actually talk about land use planning and hazard risk reduction, you know, maybe there's hope.
Great. So our next question from Deja Perkins. Knowing the deep attachment and sense of place some people have to their land and homes in disaster-prone areas, how do we do a better job of communicating to the public the risks of staying where they are and the importance of relocating after disaster strikes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that was actually on my very last slide that I should have touched on, and it's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about. Most of my career has been spent talking to people or writing policy, talking about policy or writing it. And I'm finding, and maybe this sounds pretty obvious, but it's not working. It's not working as effectively as it should. And so I'm convinced, especially now that I'm at NC State in the College of Design, my background is public policy. I am not a designer, but what I'm doing is working more with the design community, working with people in landscape architecture like Andy Fox and others to visually depict policy options. And I'm convinced that the ability to show people what the policies might look like is critically important. For example, two examples. One is coastal Mississippi. If everyone saw the images that I showed you 10 years before they were deciding whether to take a buyout, they may have changed their tune, or they may have said, yeah, I'm going to do it anyway because I'm so deeply tied to place. And many people have done it, even though they're elevating their homes 25, 30 feet in their own pilings with elevators and, you know, $150,000 set of steps. People are still doing it. But many are not. And if they had seen it beforehand, they might have sold their property and considered moving because they didn't fundamentally realize the cost of reconstruction, what their house would look like, and so forth. Another really powerful example is in Princeville, North Carolina, the oldest African-American community in America that's settled by freed slaves. They are participating in a buyout, but many of them are having their homes either torn down and rebuilt to a new standard, which is elevated, or physically picking up their house and elevating it. And actually, it's quite sad when an elderly person sees their home elevated to the current code after the fact and realizes that that's not a livable situation for them. The house is elevated 15, 20 feet in the air on pilings, and they're 80 years old, and their mobility is limited. Now they know it, but it's already happened. And so those are two examples that are really powerful to me, and I think about often. So the ability to visually depict what these look like and doing it well in advance of a storm, recognizing, empathizing, thinking through that you can't just show people pictures. You can't just tell people you should move. This has got to be a long-term, thoughtful process that is one of our fundamental challenges as we talk about adaptation.
There's a follow-up to that. Is a strong sense of place and desire to stay sometimes an example of bad resilience in a complex social ecological system? How does this manifest institutional and higher social governance scales?
Well, that's interesting. And so I was, Madhu, that's Madhu's question, I think back to the image I showed in Manila. They continue to come back. So I need to be careful how I say this. There are millions and millions of people that live, whether it's in the Sundarbans or whether it's in areas that are prone to flooding in Manila, that are building in ways that they realize their house is going to be severely damaged or destroyed, and they come back because they have limited options. I guess the questions are thinking through, and actually some developed nations are thinking through, are there lessons there? What are they? The ability of limited investment in high hazard areas. There's different ways, I think, to look at it. I don't know if it's bad resilience because the communities often keep coming back. So depending on how you define resilience, returning to some sense of normalcy or returning to some pre-event condition, or ideally returning to a better condition that you experienced before a perturbation or a shock to the system. That's a really interesting question as to, it also goes back to who decides, who determines what is good or bad resilience. So Madhu, maybe we ought to get together for coffee and talk more about that one.
Okay, the question from Aranzazu, what important tweak is necessary for FEMA as an institution to adapt to a changing climate?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. At the images that I showed, when I talk about the imperatives, there was an image, there were two cartoons. One was during the election when President Obama was, President Obama was running against Mitt Romney. Romney was talking about wanting to do away with FEMA because they didn't serve a purpose. And then we had Hurricane Sandy, and he said, "No, never mind that. I think we need to keep them. They're good." So my point is that one is our own elected officials don't fully recognize the importance of pre-event planning for foreseeable hazards. Turn on the television today and you'll see another example of it. Because it doesn't happen every day, it happens kind of episodically, and oftentimes people don't think about or don't value the investment in proactive planning for something that is not guaranteed to happen in a given period of time. It may, and it will eventually over time. So one is the episodic nature of political support of FEMA. That's one of their real challenges. I would suggest that, FEMA, many people don't realize, is a very small organization. They have a large number of disaster assistance employees that they use to supplement their capacity. And they are often constrained. They're highly constrained by bureaucratic rules. The post-disaster aid programs that they deliver are notoriously difficult to administer, hyper narrow, often don't meet local needs. They have tried to instill more proactive pre-disaster hazard mitigation and disaster recovery planning. And I would argue that management within their own agency often doesn't fully recognize the value in that. In part, I would suggest is that because FEMA's roots are in response, but nevertheless, there's some real serious, I would argue, improvements that could be made. And one of the ways it could be improved is showing that support by providing additional resources to entities in hazard mitigation and long-term disaster recovery.
We have a question from Carrie. Is there a standard for how often floodplain zones are revised?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So no, not really, in the sense that imagine there are thousands of flood insurance rate maps that need to be updated on a regular basis. And this is another issue, kind of goes to political will. The idea that the monies there are not adequate to update the maps. Oftentimes maps may remain in use that are 10, 15, 20 years old. A lot of the maps in Eastern North Carolina that were so inaccurate after Hurricane Floyd, which struck in 1999, they were developed in the early to mid 80s and they hadn't been updated. And one of the things that's interesting, and this goes to a powerful example of governance, that's where the state of North Carolina stepped in and Governor Hunt stepped in. And when we were advising him on some of the key things that needed to be done after Floyd, said we need to update the flood insurance rate maps. That's traditionally a FEMA responsibility. Well, he took that, went to the legislature and was able to procure $23 million of state money. And literally the next day we started thinking through and developing what is now the state's floodplain mapping program, which is still in operation. And the state took ownership of the creation and management of the flood insurance rate maps. FEMA has to finally approve them. But my point is that the state stood up and provided the resources necessary. However, many states and or local governments don't have the resources to do that. Charlotte had the resources to create maps that not only take into account their current flood risk, but what it would look like in the future. They did that because they had the resources and the political will to do it. And that's one of the real problems, is that there is, the equitable distribution of flood risk information or pre and post disaster assistance is not there. It's based on political will. It's based on finances. It's based on other factors.
Well, great. It looks like we are out of time, but we're going to post the recording of the seminar and a summary, as well as a transcript on the CASC website. If you look in the chat, there's links, and on a YouTube channel. And yeah, thanks for the great turnout and all the great questions. Sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but.
So
yes.
Sam, I'm sorry, very quickly, is there a way to do you have a protocol in place to connect with all these folks? I mean, I'd love to chat. I don't know if you have a mechanism to do that, but.
Well, yeah, I don't know a mechanism, but Carrie, can you?
Yeah, I'll weigh in if you wish. Since we didn't do registration, we haven't captured emails other than folks who are in the NC State system, I think, as they came in. But we'll see what we can do. And certainly we'll post the summary again on our website, and then invite outreach in that regard if folks want to, follow up the discussion after that.
Sure, sounds great. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, Gavin.
For the great seminar.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.